Welcome all to the first of what we hope will be an irregular but relatively frequent series of Oxford Economic podcasts on relevant topics. My name is Gabriel Sterne, and I'm sitting here with our head of research, the somewhat confusingly named Gabe Sterne. Gabriel, we're going to talk about Greece and capital controls. The pattern for these podcasts, as you know, is a maximum of 15 minutes and a limited number of questions. Let me ask the first question. 5 years ago, the then Greek Prime Minister, George Papandreou, requested a bailout package and program for Greece. Why on earth are we still here?
Thanks, Gabriel. And first of all, I'd just like to say a pleasure to kick off with a Two Gabriels show. There's definitely precedence in Ronnie's space to make this a very long-going saga. But the question, I think it does beg a belief that this thing can have gone on 5 years. I mean, what I've been writing about this week is actually saying there are now 4 episodes in which Greek government bonds, the price has declined by 37% or more. I mean, it's amazing. How can that possibly happen? And so to get to the core of it, I think you say it has to be something fundamental, and that fundamental thing is that Eurozone policymakers have actually chosen never to make Greek debt sustainable. And there's a clear reason for that, because to do so will be construed as letting Greece off the hook. But the thing is that, the IMF's own mantra going back decades says debt sustainability is fundamentally a political concept. And it's okay, you can write down something on paper, but if you don't have political support, then you can't construe it as sustainable. And they just seem to have forgotten that in the case of Greece. And in a way, if they didn't give birth to Syriza, I think the relentless pursuit of unsustainable debt targets has certainly fostered their growth. And Syriza definitely a popularist. There's lots of things that they've done, I think, pretty badly. But in some sense, I don't think they've even played yet the most populist card of all, which is the benefits of default. Because they can't, because it's too sensitive, because Greeks don't want to exit the euro. But if we do go into capital controls, I think that will play out. And that's the point where the fundamental discord within the Greek people, they love the euro, they hate austerity. At that point, when you say, actually, and this may be Tsipras' master plan for all I know, at that point they have to ask, what, we can save a huge chunk of Greek GDP by defaulting.
Okay, so the Greeks, like almost everyone everywhere, they want to have their cake and eat it. That's pretty straightforward. And Tsipras may be aware of the fact that these two demands are incompatible, inconsistent with each other. But let's move to the issue of capital controls, because you mentioned that. There's been a lot of talk of this. Why would Greece need to impose capital controls?
Well, in a way, capital controls is a hugely broad issue. In a way, you could say, in some sense, they've already started. When they take the capital of local governments and other quasi-government institutions, I think those institutions might feel their capital is being controlled. And that probably can go on a bit longer, but the key thing is, so far, it hasn't created a deposit run to the extent that the ECB is calling time. And you have to remember that every time Greeks take money out of the banks, in the end the people on the other side of that are the ECB or the European system of central banks, increasing their own exposures to Greece.
And this is the famous target 2 imbalances we're talking about.
Yeah, so it comes by ELA created by the Greek central bank, and ends up by these, as you say, Gabriel, the famous Target 2 imbalances, which is a liability on the Greek central bank to the European system of central banks. And Ben May will actually be publishing on this very shortly. So that's the big issue.
So Greece. So what you're saying is essentially Greece may come to a situation where if there are signs of a deposit run on the Greek banking system of Greek households and companies, and local authorities even moving their money out of reach of the Greek government for fear that it will be sequestered, the government has to recourse almost certainly by a preemptive strike, imposing capital controls to stop money flight.
Right. Well, I think there are three circumstances in which you can think of as really big capital controls, deposit freezes taking place. Three potential triggers. The first, which I think is by far the most likely, is that the political process runs its course. That the Europeans just get so impatient with Greece, they say, that's it, this is the deadline, no more. The second is that actually it's the ECB that drives it. There's some unknown pain threshold at which they get fed up their exposures. They're dripping in this extra ELA increases target, their limits, and they say that's enough. And the third is that there's just some trigger of an uncontrolled deposit run. Money starts coming out of Greek banks, not at the rate of a couple of billion a week, but it just really accelerates, and that causes the trigger for ELA to be withdrawn and capital controls to be imposed.
Okay, but if Greece imposes capital controls, can they remain a member of the Eurozone? Because that really is part of the next question, isn't it?
That is a really...
Or the next...
Yeah, that's a really key question, Gabriel. And in principle, there's no reason why not. In fact, leaving the Eurozone is actually really tricky. In practice, getting rid of capital controls depends very much on the political context, and as long as the political context is as problematic as it is in Greece, I think it will be really difficult to get rid of capital controls. Now, you have, obviously, in Cyprus, a great example of how it was done. Cyprus obviously had a very painful situation, very severe deposit haircuts, which in terms of Laiki Bank, pretty much 100% in the end of those uninsured deposits that got haircuts. But the thing about Cyprus, and this is really important, is right from the word go, or within a few days and weeks, there was a very credible plan for the removal. In Cyprus, you had solvency in the banks once the haircuts were implemented. You had liquidity of the financial system in that the ECB was putting very strong limits on ELA, but it was letting some deposits, some cash dispensers were still working. But most of all, you had a credible path for the removal of controls. You had a government that was centre-right, strongly supportive of austerity, strongly supportive of structural adjustment, and they set out a path, and it involved a staged removal of controls, and that was set out very clearly in conjunction with the Troika, that first of all reduced dependency on cash transactions, then they reinstated accessibility of funds and domestic transfers, then they lifted restrictions on cash and cheques, and finally they abolished external controls. Now the point is, in Greece, you have virtually none of that. There will be no credible path, and it will be very, very difficult to get a credible path, because even if you get a change in government, the political constituency in Greece to support the adjustment necessary is not there. So even in a good scenario, which was a Cyprus-type scenario, which took 2 years, you could to get rid of the controls. They were finally got rid of a couple of weeks ago. In Greece, I think it would take possibly double the time, and it could be much worse. My baseline would be that probably you'd end up in exit.
Let me get this right. What you're saying is capital controls are only consistent with your continued Eurozone membership if from the start you know that you will get rid of them in a reasonable time horizon, and that is not going to be the case in Greece.
I'd almost go that far. So I think it's a case of never say never. So it's always possible that at some point you can impose a credible path that's supported, and you can get out of that situation. The problem is, in the meantime, in Greece, I think you'll be doing such damage to the economy, potentially hardly having a payment system to speak of, that the situation becomes really unsustainable and needs to be concluded. Of course, the imposition of capital controls can never be separated from the political narrative, so probably very shortly there'll be a referendum. If that referendum goes in favour of the euro, but still remains against austerity, I mean, you might make it out of there in one piece, but I think the damage will be very severe.
And so the end game is what? Greece leaves the euro, or Greece remains in the euro, but simply in a state of permanent crisis, or
well, so conditional on capital controls, the way I think of the end games is in a scenario context. So I would say there's a 40% chance that you end up out of the euro quite quickly because of the chaotic nature of the thing, and that is a clear resolution. And then, there's probably a 30% chance that you get the referendum, you move on to the path, the Cypriot path, you have a clear way that actually gets carried out, and then there's another 30% chance that you get this period of extended brinksmanship in limbo, but ultimately it doesn't work out and you end up in exit. So I guess I'm saying conditional on capital controls, 70% chance exit, 30% breakthrough and back into the euro.
Well, many years ago, in my previous job, one of my colleagues who was very skeptical about the euro said we should be grateful to the euro, it will keep us in employment for many, many years. And I think what you're really saying here is the Greek crisis is going to remain a topic for a long time to come, so I have a feeling we will revert to this in the future. In the meantime, thank you very much, Gabe Sterne, Head of Macro Research at Oxford Economics, and there will be future podcasts on this and on other topics. Thank you very much.